The scent of lavender clung to her coat, a fragrance she knew I hated. That was the first clue, one small sign of the betrayal that would unravel my entire world. The scent hit Andrew like a punch to the senses. Lavender, sweet and suffocating, completely alien in their home. He hated that scent and had for years. Emily knew that all too well. Yet here it was, clinging to her coat as she walked through the door, her face glowing with a brightness he hadn't seen in ages. "You're late," Andrew said, his voice stiff as he pointed toward the clock. "Work ran long," Emily replied, tossing her explanation out casually. But her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She draped her coat over the rack and strode toward the kitchen, her heels tapping rhythmically on the hardwood floor. Each click of her heels seemed to chip away at Andrew's composure, a steady reminder of how far she had drifted from him. It wasn't just the lavender. It was everything. The way her phone never left her hand, always face down on the counter. The way she truly laughed now, bright and genuine, but only at her phone's messages, never during their conversations. How she'd retreat into the bedroom for long stretches, re-emerging polished and radiant, as though dressing up for someone who wasn't him. "Big presentation tonight?" Andrew asked, keeping his tone neutral as he watched her pour a glass of wine. Emily's hand froze on the stem of the glass for a second. "Yeah," she answered, her voice carrying a faint edge of irritation. "Clients expect a polished appearance?" Andrew fought back the urge to question her. He knew how absurd it sounded. They worked in tech. Since when did clients care about lipstick and stilettos for a late-night meeting? But he let it go. For now. The next morning, the faint trace of lavender still lingered. It gnawed at Andrew's mind as he sat at the breakfast table. Emily moved through the kitchen like a ghost, her phone glued to her hand. She barely acknowledged him or the kids, Ethan and Lily, who clamored around her, seeking her attention. "Mom, can you come to my recital next week?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with hope. Emily hesitated, her face tightening for a moment before she forced a strained smile. "We'll see, sweetie. Mommy's got a lot going on at work right now." Andrew caught the disappointment that flashed in Ethan's face. He couldn't let it stand. "I'll be there, buddy," he said, ruffling his son's hair. "Thanks, Dad." Ethan beamed, the sadness vanishing from his expression. Emily's eyes darted to Andrew, narrowing in silent disapproval. The look said it all. That simple promise had crossed some invisible line. But Andrew held her gaze steadily, unwilling to back down. As Emily left for work, Andrew's focus shifted to the coat rack. Her coat, still carrying that ghostly trace of lavender, hung where she had left it. On impulse, Andrew rose from his seat, a dark knot of suspicion twisting in his gut. Without pausing to reconsider, he reached for the coat. Andrew slipped his hand into the coat pocket and pulled out a folded receipt. It was from a nearby cafe, not the usual spot Emily preferred, but one of those trendy places they barely ever visited. The timestamp read 9:15 p.m., right in the middle of her supposed late-night meeting. His chest constricted as a surge of questions hit him like a tidal wave. Who had she been with? Why was she lying to him? Over the next few days, the signs became impossible to dismiss. Emily's phone seemed permanently attached to her hand. Her laughter, the same laughter Andrew had adored, was now reserved for her private texts. Her explanations for her absences grew thinner and less convincing. "Big client dinner tonight," she said casually one evening, slipping into a sleek black dress that hugged her figure. Andrew raised an eyebrow, his voice laced with quiet sarcasm. "Do software clients care about designer dresses now?" Emily froze for a moment in the doorway, her face hardening. "You just don't get it, Andrew. You've never understood what it takes to make it in my world," she snapped, her voice cold and detached. Before he could form a response, she was gone, leaving behind the intoxicating scent of her perfume and a hollow ache in Andrew's chest. He knew it was time to stop waiting for answers. If Emily wouldn't tell him the truth, he'd uncover it himself. Starting cautiously, Andrew reviewed her recent credit card transactions and old phone bills. That's when he found it, a series of charges for a hotel just outside of town. The dates lined up perfectly with nights she had claimed to be working late. His heart raced as he stared at the evidence, each charge solidifying the fears that had gnawed at him for weeks. The picture taking shape in his mind was one of betrayal, one he wished desperately to erase. On Saturday morning, Emily casually announced her plans. "I'm meeting Sarah for brunch," she said as she gathered her things. Andrew felt a bitter chuckle threatening to rise in his throat but swallowed it down. Sarah had been out of town for weeks. Emily had mentioned it herself just days earlier. "Oh? Which place are you meeting her at?" he asked, keeping his tone light and curious. "The Green Fig," Emily answered without hesitation. Andrew forced a smile. Sounds nice. Tell her I said hi. Andrew waited for the moment Emily drove off before grabbing his keys and following her, his mind racing with dread. He kept a safe distance as her car made its way to a secluded, run-down motel on the outskirts of town, the type of place that promised discretion and anonymity. Andrew's stomach churned as he watched her park, glance around nervously and disappear inside. For 20 agonizing minutes, he sat in his car, torn between two choices, barging in to confront her or driving away to preserve whatever shred of sanity he had left. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, suffocating, until he made his decision. Inside the motel lobby, Andrew's eyes immediately landed on something that froze him in place. A lavender scarf draped casually over the back of a chair. He recognized it instantly. He had bought it for Emily years ago during a romantic getaway, back when he believed their marriage was unshakable. The memory stabbed at him with cruel precision. That scarf, once a token of their bond, was now a symbol of everything crumbling between them. He approached the front desk, his jaw clenched. The receptionist barely looked up, his demeanor bored and indifferent. "Can I help you?" the man asked flatly. "Yes," Andrew said, his voice steadier than he expected. "I'm meeting someone, Emily Whitaker." "Which room is she in?" The receptionist frowned, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Sorry, sir. We can't give out that kind of information." Andrew's frustration boiled over. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'm her husband," he said, trying to keep his anger in check. "She's meeting someone here and I need to know where." The receptionist hesitated, visibly uncomfortable, before shaking his head. "Sorry, man. I really can't help you." Defeated but not deterred, Andrew stormed out and returned to his car, parking in a spot with a clear view of the entrance. He waited, tension coiling in his gut like a spring. Another 20 minutes crawled by before Emily finally emerged. Her cheeks were flushed, her hair slightly tousled. But what drew Andrew's focus wasn't just her, it was the man following close behind her. He was tall, dark-haired, and exuded an air of self-assuredness that made Andrew's blood boil. They didn't touch, but the charged space between them spoke volumes. It was an intimacy Andrew recognized immediately, one that he hadn't shared with his wife in a long time. Gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, Andrew fought the overwhelming urge to confront them. Every fiber of his being screamed for him to demand answers then and there. But he forced himself to stay composed. Acting on impulse wouldn't help. He needed a plan and he needed undeniable proof. Quietly he watched them leave, his mind already calculating his next move. Andrew pulled out his phone and snapped a photo. It wasn't perfect, grainy and slightly blurred, but it was enough. Enough to confirm what he already knew. Enough to fuel the anger quietly burning inside him. He sat there for a moment, staring at the image, trying to steady his thoughts before heading home. That evening, Andrew said nothing as Emily walked in, acting as though everything was perfectly normal. She greeted Ethan and Lily with exaggerated cheer, recounting her supposed brunch with her sister as if nothing were amiss. Andrew observed her intently, his silence beginning to unsettle her. "You're quiet tonight," Emily said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Long day," he replied with practiced neutrality, his voice calm and measured. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scrutinizing him for any sign of what he might be thinking, but Andrew gave nothing away. The fury beneath his calm exterior remained hidden. Later that night, after Emily went to bed, Andrew stayed up, meticulously combing through her social media accounts and cross-referencing details with her recent stories. With each inconsistency he uncovered, his resolve hardened. He wasn't just gathering evidence anymore, he was building his case, preparing for the confrontation he knew was coming. The following week Andrew turned to his brother Sean. Sean was a no-nonsense kind of guy who thrived on chaos and never backed down from a challenge. They met in Sean's cluttered garage, the smell of motor oil and grease thick in the air. "I need your help," Andrew said quietly, his voice low. Sean raised an eyebrow. "What kind of help?" Andrew hesitated, then pulled out his phone, showing Sean the photo. Sean let out a slow whistle, his expression darkening as he studied it. "That's her, huh?" Sean asked. Andrew nodded silently. Sean leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "So what's the plan? You just gonna sit on this, or are you gonna make her pay?" "I'm not rushing into anything," Andrew replied, shaking his head. "I need to know more. Who this guy is, how long it's been going on. I want to hit her where it really hurts." A smirk tugged at Sean's lips. "Finally growing a spine, little brother. I'm proud of you." With Sean's help, Andrew took the next step. They installed a small GPS tracker on Emily's car, allowing him to track her movements with precision. The pattern quickly became clear: repeated trips to the same motel at the same times, always accompanied by the same weak excuses. Each new discovery deepened Andrew's sense of betrayal. But he held back. He didn't confront her. Not yet. He chose to wait, letting the evidence mount, determined to be fully prepared when the moment came to expose everything. The lies had grown too numerous to ignore. One night, as Andrew pored over Emily's phone records, a new thought struck him. Did the man she was meeting, Justin Flanagan, have a family of his own? Did he have someone waiting for him at home, oblivious to what was happening? Using Justin's number from Emily's call logs, Andrew quickly searched social media and found his answer. Justin was married, with 2 young children. Andrew stared at the screen, his anger mingling with a strange sense of solidarity. If Justin's wife didn't know, she deserved the truth, just like Andrew did. The next day, Andrew found himself standing in front of a modest suburban home. He hesitated for a moment, then knocked firmly on the door. A woman in her early 30s answered, a toddler balanced on her hip. She looked cautious as she spoke. "Can I help you?" "My name's Andrew Whitaker," he said, keeping his voice calm but steady. "I believe my wife is having an affair with your husband." Her eyes widened and the color drained from her face. "What?" "I'm really sorry," Andrew said, raising his phone slightly. "But I have proof. Can I come in?" After a long pause, she stepped aside, her expression a mixture of shock and dread. "I'm Rachel Flanagan," she said quietly. They moved to the living room where she sat on the couch, the toddler clinging to her. Her hands trembled slightly as she gestured for Andrew to continue. "Show me," she said, her voice unsteady. Andrew handed her the phone. The image of Emily and Justin outside the motel filled the screen. Rachel's eyes locked onto the photo, her face frozen in disbelief. After several long seconds, she whispered, her voice barely audible, "I knew something wasn't right. He's been working late, traveling more, but I never thought." Her voice trailed off as she gripped the edge of the couch, trying to steady herself. Andrew nodded slowly. "I didn't want to believe it either. But it's the same motel. Every time." Rachel wiped at her eyes, her sorrow beginning to harden into anger. "He acts like the perfect husband," she muttered bitterly. "But now I know the truth." For a few moments they sat together in silence, the weight of betrayal hanging between them like a fog. Finally Rachel straightened, her eyes blazing with new determination. "So," she said firmly, "what are you going to do?" Andrew hesitated. He wasn't sure how to answer. He had come this far, but now the enormity of what lay ahead made his next steps feel uncertain. He inhaled deeply, thinking through his response. "I'm not sure yet," he admitted. "But I know one thing, we deserve better than this." "I'm not sure yet," Andrew said, his voice steady but cold. "But I'm not letting her get away with this." "Then let me help," Rachel replied firmly. "If we're both in this, we might as well fight back together." Over the next week, they became a united front. Rachel, driven by her own sense of betrayal, proved to be an invaluable ally. She accessed Justin's phone records, uncovering explicit messages between him and Emily that removed any lingering doubt about the affair. "Look at this," Rachel said, sliding her laptop toward Andrew. The messages were damning. Plans to meet, shared complaints about their spouses, and even cruel moments of mocking disdain. Andrew's jaw clenched as he read, each word slicing into him like a fresh wound. But he pushed down the pain, keeping his focus. "We need to time this right," Andrew said. "A simple confrontation isn't enough. They need to face real consequences." Rachel nodded in agreement. "So what's the plan?" "Expose them," Andrew said without hesitation. "To everyone. Their families, their friends, their coworkers. And we make sure it sticks in court." Together, they meticulously crafted their strategy, deciding how and when the confrontation would unfold. It had to be public, a place where neither Emily nor Justin could deny the truth or flee from the fallout. The opportunity presented itself the following Saturday when Andrew's GPS tracker showed Emily meeting Justin at a park, under the guise of running errands. Andrew and Rachel arrived separately, positioning themselves where they wouldn't be spotted. From a distance, they watched as Emily and Justin sat on a park bench, laughing and leaning into each other with the carefree giddiness of teenagers. The sight twisted Andrew's stomach with rage, but he forced himself to stay composed. "Let's do this," he said softly to Rachel, his voice low but steady. Together they walked toward the bench. As Andrew approached, Emily's face paled instantly, her expression freezing in shock. Justin, sitting beside her, looked equally panicked. Rachel stepped forward behind Andrew, her presence adding an undeniable weight to the moment. "What's going on?" Emily asked, her voice trembling barely above a whisper. "You tell me," Andrew replied icily. "Or better yet, why don't you explain to Rachel what you've been doing with her husband?" Emily's wide eyes darted to Justin, silently pleading for support. But Justin was as stunned and paralyzed as she was. This isn't what it looks like," Emily stammered, her voice cracking with fear. Andrew raised a hand, cutting her off. Don't insult me by pretending there's an innocent explanation." Rachel stepped forward, then her phone raised. "Oh, don't worry," she said coldly. "I think everyone will understand exactly what's going on once they see this. I've seen the messages, Justin." "Don't even bother denying it," Rachel said coldly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Justin opened his mouth as if to speak, but no words came. His face drained of color, and he looked as though the air had been sucked from his lungs. "You lied to me," Rachel continued, her voice trembling with fury. "To me, to our kids, to everyone who ever trusted you. You're nothing but a coward." Justin looked away, unable to meet her eyes. Meanwhile, Emily turned to Andrew, desperation twisting her features. "Please, Andrew," she begged. "Can we talk about this?" "We'll talk," Andrew replied firmly, his voice as cold as ice. In court, after the confrontation, both Emily and Justin scrambled to regain control of the situation, but it was too late. Andrew and Rachel had already set their plan in motion. Andrew's meticulously gathered evidence became the foundation of his strategy to protect his children and hold Emily accountable. He met with his lawyer Mark and laid out all the files he had compiled: receipts, phone logs, GPS records, and the incriminating messages. "This is solid," Mark said, flipping through the documents. "With this, you have a strong case for custody, especially if we can demonstrate Rebecca's neglect." Rachel, meanwhile, filed for divorce, citing infidelity and emotional cruelty. "Justin won't know what hit him," she declared with steely resolve. Emily, sensing that her world was falling apart, resorted to every tactic she could think of. Her messages swung wildly between tearful apologies and venomous accusations. "You're ruining our family," read one message. Another spat, "This is all your fault." Andrew ignored them. His focus remained on Ethan and Lily. His children were his priority. He refused to let Emily's emotional manipulation pull them into the chaos she had created. But Emily wasn't done yet. She filed for joint custody, accusing Andrew of alienating the children from her. It all led to the ultimate showdown in court. The courthouse loomed large, its towering facade a stark reminder of the battle ahead. Andrew straightened his tie and took a steadying breath as Mark walked beside him. "You're ready for this," Mark said with quiet confidence. "We have the evidence, and Rebecca's behavior speaks for itself. Stay calm and let me handle the heavy lifting." Inside the courtroom, Andrew locked eyes with Emily across the room. Her appearance was carefully curated: soft colors, understated makeup, all meant to project innocence. Her lawyer, Frank, was an experienced litigator with an air of authority that filled the space. Andrew felt the tension coil tighter in his chest but kept his composure. This was the moment he had prepared for. He wasn't going to back down. Frank began with a polished argument, his voice smooth and measured. "My client, Rebecca Whitaker, is a devoted mother who has been unfairly denied access to her children," he declared. "This case is about restoring her rightful place in their lives." Andrew bit his tongue, recalling Mark's advice to remain composed no matter how provoked. This was a battle of strategy, not emotion. When Mark took the floor, her calm and commanding presence shifted the courtroom's atmosphere. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and resolute, "this case is not about a mother being wrongfully denied access to her children. It is about a parent who has consistently prioritized her personal desires over her parental responsibilities." Mark laid out the evidence with unwavering precision. Motel receipts, credit card statements detailing extravagant, personal purchases, phone records that exposed Rebecca's long-term affair. As each piece of evidence was revealed, Mark's voice carried a calm authority. "These actions," Mark concluded, "demonstrate a clear pattern of neglect. My client, Andrew Whitaker, has provided a stable and nurturing environment for Ethan and Lily. He is the parent best suited to continue doing so." Rachel took the stand next, and her testimony became a turning point in the case. With quiet but undeniable strength, she described the affair between Emily and Justin, detailing how their lies had torn apart not only their marriages but their families as well. "They didn't just betray us," Rachel said, her voice steady though her eyes glistened with restrained emotion. They lied to their children and neglected their duties as parents. Andrew deserves the right to protect his kids from that kind of chaos. Frank objected several times, but Rachel's testimony left a lasting impression. Her calm, resolute words lingered in the air long after she stepped down. As the evidence mounted against her, Emily's carefully constructed facade began to fracture. She glared at Andrew across the courtroom, but the impact of the truth was undeniable. Andrew remained composed, knowing he had done everything possible to protect his children and reveal the truth. Mark continued dismantling Rebecca's claims, systematically exposing the inconsistencies in her story and emphasizing the undeniable proof of her neglect and deceit. The hours stretched on with testimony, cross-examinations, and final arguments. Each moment tightened the pressure on Rebecca, who struggled to maintain her composure under the weight of the mounting evidence. Finally, the moment arrived. The judge prepared to deliver the final ruling. The courtroom fell into a tense, almost eerie stillness. Andrew held his breath, his heart pounding as he awaited the decision that would shape the future of his family. The judge addressed both Andrew and Emily directly, her voice carrying the weight of finality. Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, the evidence presented today speaks for itself. This court is obligated to act in the best interests of the children. The ruling will reflect that responsibility. After the ruling, everything felt surreal. For the first time in what seemed like forever, Andrew experienced a sense of peace. The house, once filled with tension and conflict, was now alive with the joyful laughter of Ethan and Lily. The kids quickly adapted to their new routine, and Andrew made sure to be fully present in their lives. He attended every recital, every soccer game, and tucked them in every night with a bedtime story. Together they began rebuilding their lives, filling each day with warmth, stability, and hope for the future. Emily, however, wasn't ready to relinquish control. She sent cryptic texts, ranging from half-hearted apologies to veiled threats, attempting to disrupt the fragile peace Andrew had worked so hard to create. Andrew documented each message, forwarding them to Mark the next day to ensure everything was on record. But over time, Emily's attempts to interfere became less frequent. Slowly but surely, the chaos that had once dominated their lives began to fade into the background. Andrew focused on giving his children a life free of fear and instability. Ethan and Lily flourished. Ethan joined the school soccer team, scoring goals and making new friends with growing confidence. Lily found a passion for art, filling the house with her colorful drawings that seemed to radiate joy. Though Emily still attended her supervised visits, the children remained distant and polite but detached. Her repeated absences and lack of meaningful effort had damaged their bond in ways she couldn't easily mend. Then one day Andrew received a call from Mark. Rebecca's filed to terminate supervised visits, Mark informed him. She's asking for unrestricted access to the kids. Andrew sighed, the familiar tension knotting in his chest. Do we have to go back to court? Not necessarily, Mark replied. But we'll need to strategize carefully. Andrew felt the weight of his responsibility pressing down once more. He wasn't going to let his children be dragged back into the chaos. He would do whatever it took to protect the peace they had fought so hard to reclaim. We can contest it with the evidence we have, Mark explained, but it's likely the judge will request a full review of the situation. Andrew nodded, bracing himself for yet another legal battle. But this time he didn't feel the weight of it alone. Rachel had been by his side throughout the ordeal, a constant and reliable presence. Their conversations had become more than just strategy sessions. They were filled with shared stories, jokes, and support. Though neither was ready to dive into anything romantic just yet, there was an undeniable connection between them, a quiet understanding built on trust and resilience. On a crisp autumn morning, Andrew found himself standing on the sidelines of Ethan's soccer game, cheering loudly as his son scored a goal. Beside him, Lily sat with her sketchpad, capturing the scene with her usual focus. The golden sunlight filtered through the trees, warming the cool air around them. Can we get ice cream to celebrate? Lily asked eagerly, her eyes shining with hope. Andrew chuckled, ruffling her hair. How can I say no to that? The ride to their favorite ice cream shop was filled with laughter and playful banter, a stark contrast to the tense silences that had once haunted their home. The warmth and light in the car reminded Andrew just how far they had come, how much healing had taken place. As the years passed, Andrew built a new life for himself and his children. One morning in the kitchen of their new home, he stood flipping pancakes on the stove. Ethan, now a teenager, was teasing Lily, who responded with dramatic protests and giggles. The scent of syrup and fresh pancakes filled the air. Here you go, sweetheart, Andrew said, pouring syrup over Lily's plate. she beamed up at him. "Dad, these are the best pancakes ever," she declared with a grin. Andrew laughed. "That's because they're made with love." Ethan rolled his eyes but couldn't hide the smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Life wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was their life, filled with new memories, simple joys, and quiet moments of peace. And for Andrew that was more than enough. He had faced betrayal, heartache, and uncertainty, but those trials had shaped him into a stronger, more present father. The past would always be a part of his story, but it no longer defined him. It was just one chapter in a journey of resilience and hope. As the years rolled on, the echoes of the past grew softer, replaced by the steady rhythm of a life rebuilt. Andrew watched his children flourish, Ethan thriving on the soccer field and in school, Lily blossoming as an artist whose drawings now lined the walls of their home. The weight that had once pressed on Andrew's shoulders was gone, replaced by a deep gratitude for the life he had carved out of the wreckage. Emily's presence in their lives faded over time. Though her attempts to regain custody continued for a while, each court hearing reaffirmed that Andrew had created a stable, loving environment for the kids. Eventually the battles ended. Emily's visits became sporadic and soon she disappeared from their day-to-day routine entirely. Ethan and Lily seemed to grow more at peace with every passing day, their bond with Andrew growing stronger with each bedtime story, family outing, and simple act of love. One bright spring evening, Andrew stood on the porch of their home, gazing out at the sunset. Rachel had come by for dinner, bringing her 2 kids who were now close friends with Ethan and Lily. The sound of laughter drifted from the backyard as the children played a makeshift game of tag. Rachel joined him on the porch, handing him a glass of lemonade. "They're so happy," she said, smiling as she watched the kids chase each other. "It's amazing how resilient they are." "They are," Andrew agreed softly. "I think we all are." Rachel turned to him, her eyes warm and filled with understanding. "You've come a long way, Andrew." "We both have." He smiled, feeling the truth of her words deep in his heart. The pain of the past no longer defined him. It had shaped him, yes, but it had also brought him here, to a life filled with hope, laughter, and the people who mattered most. Later that night, after the kids were asleep, Andrew sat on the edge of Ethan's bed. His son stirred and opened his eyes slightly. "Hey, Dad," Ethan murmured sleepily. "Thanks for today." "Anytime, buddy," Andrew said, squeezing his shoulder. "I love you." "Love you too," Ethan whispered before drifting off. Andrew stood quietly for a moment, looking around at the room filled with trophies, drawings, and memories of a life he never would have imagined years ago. Life wasn't perfect, but it was his. A life defined not by betrayal but by love, resilience, and the unbreakable bond he shared with his children. As Andrew turned off the lights and closed the door behind him, he knew that this was the life he had fought for, and finally, it was the one he truly deserved.